Hey, Kids Cook Real Food. Katie Kimball here for the Healthy Parenting Connector, where we always strive to connect you parents who really want to raise healthy, independent adults with the experts who have the information you need. Today, we are kind of dialing up the age group a little bit. We're talking about tweens and middle school experience and how we can sort of make that middle school experience a little less dramatic and traumatic, because I tell you, those are the two words I think of when I think of personally my middle school experiences. And so today I've got Phyllis Fagell here with us. She is a school counselor, a therapist, but also a writer and speaker. So she does the work and she teaches others, teaches parents, how to guide their tweens through middle school. Thank you so much for being here today, Phyllis.
Thank you for having me. And another time you'll have to share those stories. I love the middle school stories.
Oh, but it's so traumatic.
I will say that I think that we tend to have inflated negative memories of our middle school experience because it was the first time for many of us we experienced those kinds of setbacks and we were going through puberty. We have a little more perspective when we're older, so they may not actually have been inherently worse than other setbacks in our life.
Which is, I mean, that's the perfect picture of middle school, though, because they did feel that intense. And isn't that part of the divide between adults and pre-adolescents, is that for them, it really does feel like it's the end of the world. And us in our wisdom, we say, yeah, but it's not a big deal. And we're speaking different vocabulary, right?
Definitely. And it can take some patience to really stop and listen and think about why it's so important to them and to validate what they're saying before we jump in right away to solutions. Because often for us, it looks like we could solve that problem in a second.
Yes. I love how you threw in some before patience. That's very generous of you. It takes a lot of my patience. I have a 12-year-old girl and a 15-year-old boy. So like I'm right in the thick of it. Let me tell people real quick a little more about you. Phyllis is the author of Middle School Matters. She's also a frequent contributor to the Washington Post and has freelanced for Psychology Today, Working Mother, US News and World Report, and been spotlighted in big ones like the New York Times, the Atlantic, and NPR. And now, oh my goodness, the Healthy Parenting Connector. I love my job. This is so great. Phyllis lives in Maryland with her husband and 3 children. And where are the ages of your children right now?
So I have a 7th grader, that's my youngest, it's a boy. And then I have a daughter who's a senior in high school. And my oldest is a son as well, and he's a freshman in college.
Oh, awesome. So you've got one who launched right in the middle of a pandemic. So that was very strange, I'm sure.
Yes.
Transitioning, but luckily that's not what we're here to talk about. But let's talk about middle school. I mean, many of us, I think, barely feel like we survived it, and you have chosen to go back and immerse yourself in middle school. You're actively a counselor at a middle school. What's your motivation for like focusing on this preteen, pre-adolescent group?
So I actually started my counseling career in elementary and high school. And what I found when I first got to a middle school was that it was like landing on the moon. It was so different from the other age groups that I had worked with. And
Really?
so I ran around looking for material sources, anything that would give me some help. I just felt like, okay, this is a new world. I'm going to have to figure this out. But what I really quickly discovered is that there wasn't anything. No one was writing about tweens. It was this, they were really the middle child, the neglected middle child.
Wow.
And they were so maligned. Everybody thought about them as these mean, drama seeking kids, and that wasn't what I was seeing. And so, in the absence of any information, I decided to create it myself.
Oh my goodness. I love that. You said you felt like you landed on an alien world, and I'm having this vision of you like staking the flag. Like, I have discovered the forgotten people and I'm here to help them. It's
Yeah.
it's so true though. I mean, I'm a former teacher, and in the world of education, you hear a lot of people say, "Yeah, but I could never do middle school."
The people who do middle school love it. It's a unique breed. And the people who don't love it leave pretty quickly. But really, middle school is like the Jan Brady of education.
I love that so much. So so what makes middle schoolers different? Like, what are the crises in the middle school brain as this middle child here?
What aren't the crises in the middle school brain?
Touche.
So, you have to think about the developmental phase globally in order to really understand what they're going through. So they are at a point in their life where they're changing faster than they have at any other time in their life other than birth age 2. And they're completely uncomfortable in their own changing bodies. They're suddenly completely aware of wherever they think they fall short, whether or not they do, it doesn't really matter. They're mercilessly self-critical, and they're trying to figure out their place in the social hierarchy at a time when bullying peaks and the friendships that kids are making are constantly shifting. So they're really fragile friendships and they're desperate for them. So, and then on top of all of that, they're entering a school setting where suddenly the work ramps up, the difficulty is higher, they have more teachers to manage, they do not have the executive functioning skills to match those demands. And you put it all together, and they're trying to pull away from their parents and spend more time with their peers. And so the parents haven't yet adjusted to that need. So there can be more clashes between parents and kids. All of that is normal, but really, really hard.
And a lot. I mean, you really did nail it. You said, what is not a crisis? We got the physical body, the psychology, the emotions, the relationships, the academics, like literally, it's all a hot mess. Now, what about girls versus boys? Do they experience the bumps of adolescence differently?
They do, and they also show how they're feeling differently. In some ways, it's easier to be a boy in middle school, and in some ways, it's harder to be a
Okay.
boy in middle school. So, from what I've observed over the years, girls are very quick to internalize a mistake as something that's going to impact their entire life. So if they let a goal in at a soccer game, everybody's going to hate them. They let the team down. If a boy lets in a goal at a soccer game, it's, that defense really didn't do their part. It
Mm.
is not his fault. So boys are quicker to externalize blame, whereas girls tend to internalize it.
Okay.
Girls also experience a greater drop in confidence that other people like them in middle school. They experience a 46% drop. Both boys and girls do experience a drop in confidence, though, but boys are more like 30%. And what makes it more difficult to be a boy is that they're feeling all of that pressure to conform to this masculine expectations, what it means to be a real man. And
Mm.
they're impacted just as much, by the way, today by all of the pressure to have the right body and the right look as girls are, because it directly correlates with social media and what they're being exposed to. And that's different from when we were growing up.
It is. That's new. So like our peers in like let's say 70s, 80s, or 90s, boys body image issues are not really there.
They probably were there, but they weren't as pronounced and they
Okay.
weren't as aware of what they were expected to look like. They had magazines, but they weren't being bombarded 24/7 with social media. I've had, a seventh grade boy once said to me, when you go online and you see the ads for the ads for the ab machines, it makes you think like you should have a six pack in 45 minutes. And not like that.
Right.
That makes it
Right.
harder.
Yeah. Okay. So experience a greater drop in confidence. I mean, I just that totally makes sense with the whole internalizing thing. So, what can parents do to help diminish that drop, I guess, or bring the confidence back up for girls in particular?
There's a lot parents can do, which is the good news. Uh,
Yes.
One of the things parents can do is be really clear that they're imperfect and talk about the bumps they experienced along the way, and not just their own bumps, but the things that family members have experienced. There's actually research showing that when you share stories of your own family members, what they call oscillating narratives, maybe they had a business that fell apart and then they rebuilt it, or they were the first in the family to go to college. When you share those stories, it actually really improves their well-being. Another thing, otherwise, I think your life is a perfect line from, seventh grade to success. They just have an unrealistic expectation. Another thing parents can do is when things do go wrong, like maybe you forget to fax a document at work, you might want to come home and just unload in front of them to a partner and say, I'm like really worried about my job. And you don't want to squelch how you're feeling, but what you want to do is see it all the way through and say, I was really embarrassed about a mistake I made. And for a minute, I thought, wow, what if I lose my job? And then I thought, you know what? I'm overreacting. And here's what I'm going to do. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk to my boss and I'm going to find out if I can fax it tomorrow. And in the meantime, I'm going to put it out of my head. I'm going to listen to some music and relax. And so you're really modeling for them how you're managing the stress. And then the other thing I'll mention for helping girls continue to take risks is to really encourage them to continue to put themselves out there. so middle schoolers are really aware of what's called the imaginary audience. I think everyone is staring at them. I actually had a
I
girl in
still
here.
have that.
I know, but it's a lot better than it is for them. I had a sixth grader in here the other day, and she was showing me her arm and the arm hair. And she was like, I feel like so embarrassed. I just want to tweezers. I want to pull out my arm hair because it's so dark and awful. And I am not lying when I say I didn't see any arm hair. And I don't have the best vision, but I really am 100% sure that there was nothing aberrant at all about her arm hair. And she was just completely obsessed with this arm hair. And I explained the whole imaginary audience to her. And I said, I know it feels like everyone's staring at you, but really everyone is just thinking about themselves. And there really is no such thing as, the imaginary audience is called an imaginary audience for a reason. And she said, I don't care what you call it, it's there. It's just really hard for them. And so that can show up in a lot of ways. They might not want to try out for a play or speak up in class with virtual learning. A lot of kids didn't want to be on the camera.
Yeah.
They don't want to even like texting a new friend or somebody that they want to hang out with can be a really big social risk. And so what we can do as parents is to really help them come up with smaller goals, smaller little bite-sized risks that they can take, because that is how you build their confidence, by having them try something that's manageable and see that it goes well, and then they're willing to take another step.
I feel like what you just said is basically middle schoolers, but girls in particular, they feel like they always have an audience. They're just sitting there and they have an audience. So how could they possibly get on stage, right? That magnifies all the fear.
Yes, and in fact, we've had to make adjustments in the school setting for this. We had a few virtual learners, and most of them are at this point back in person. And one of the parents wrote in and said, could you please not beam my simulcasting virtual student up onto the whiteboard, because he feels so spotlighted because it's only him and a couple of other people. And so what I've been telling teachers is to turn the desks around so that the people who are simulcasting are at the back of the room, as opposed to the students looking at the person. And probably the students aren't really thinking about the person on the screen, but it doesn't matter. It's such a distraction for them. Even seeing
Yeah.
themselves is a distraction.
Oh my goodness. Oh, totally. Totally. And I love what you said. I just have to rewind a little bit because you basically told parents anytime you feel like you might be talking like a middle schooler, model how to fix that, right? Like, oh, I was worried, right? So if you notice in your own head, oh, I'm kind of like magnifying things. I'm talking like a middle schooler. I better model for my middle schooler, right? How to close that off with the wisdom of an adult. So I love that.
Yes, and also really be mindful of how you talk about other people in front of them. Because, and I mean that in both a positive and a negative way. If you go out of your way to point out that there's an idiosyncrasy or a quirk in a friend that might be something that someone else would judge, and say something positive about it, or if you're really constantly referencing people with different backstories or different histories, and really helping them understand that everyone is deserving of respect and that the quirks and idiosyncrasies are what make us special, then it's kind of win-win, because they're not only going to be kinder to other people, but they're much more likely to embrace the idea that they too are deserving of respect and that their idiosyncrasies are okay. And they're all weird. All middle schoolers are weird. So we want to make sure that they really embrace their weirdness.
Embrace the weirdness. That's my favorite. I own the weirdness in my own life. Now, I used two words at the beginning of the interview: traumatic and dramatic. There's no doubt that middle school has some drama. So how can we help middle schoolers? You use the word reframe and survive the middle school drama.
So one of the best ways to do that, when your kid comes home and they're super upset about something that has happened in their peer group, is to really try to help them zoom in and figure out if they're at the core of that drama. Are they worked up about a fight that actually involves two other people, and they can take a step back and not get involved? Middle schoolers have a really, really hard time understanding the concept that they don't actually have to get involved, that what other people say about them is none of their business. That's another way they get tripped up. So really getting them in the habit of analyzing the situation, figuring out their role, and thinking ahead. What might happen if I get involved? Will I make it worse? What is the likely outcome? Will I end up getting myself more upset? One example is if they come home and they're upset with a friend who has let them out, and they want to get on the phone with all of their other friends and rehash it and talk about it. But what that usually does is heighten the drama and make them feel worse because they're just sitting and marinating in all of that discomfort. So we want to make sure that we are helping them think about other alternative solutions when those things happen. And then the other way that you can help your middle schooler if they are experiencing some drama and feeling hurt or wounded, which is usually the outcome, is to help them think more flexibly. And I have kids play what I call the maybe game. So they have to come up with 5 alternative explanations for why they were dropped off that group text chain. And they don't even have to believe it. It can be totally unrealistic. It can be that they thought you had been alienated, that you had been abducted by aliens from outer space. It can be funny, it can be silly. The whole point, though, is to get them in the habit of entertaining the possibility that they might be catastrophizing. And hopefully they'll also come up with some possibilities like, maybe they didn't realize you were not on the text chain. Maybe that was a tech fail, or maybe they thought you were at piano lesson, or that you were not available to come for the sleepover. Or maybe they were just, if it's a sleepover they haven't been invited to, maybe they were all at soccer practice together and it just happened organically. And it's not that they were leaving you out, they just didn't have you on their radar, and it was nothing personal.
And you're saying like the parent isn't making up those scenarios. You're
No.
asking the questions. You're teaching the child to think,
Yes.
right? This parents, oh my gosh, parents, are you writing this down? Like, are you taking notes? Are you going to re-listen to that section? Because I literally feel, I feel like the next time one of my kids comes home with a drama situation, I'll be like, just a second. I'm going to go listen to 5 minutes from Phyllis because she told me exactly how to do it. You know, like you're this like, you can totally tell your counselor, just like, this is what you do. And this is what you do. And I'm like, dynamite. So, so, so good. I think, you know, you talked a little bit too about how middle school, you get a lot more responsibility. And on top of everything else that's changing, you know, it just adds to it. And I know in our family and in my teaching with other families, I talk often about what I call a gradual release of responsibility. You know, really from birth to age 18, you're constantly giving out a little more, especially with decisions, right? And middle school is so critical in this decision-making process. So in your experience, like what are some decisions and responsibilities that you would tell parents all middle schoolers should begin to take upon themselves?
So you have to start from the expectation that no matter what you do when it comes to teaching them decision-making skills, when it comes to helping them assume more responsibilities, that they are going to have moments where they mess up and they're going to have moments where they shirk those responsibilities. And so you just want to keep moving the dial. One of the ways to do that is once you give them a responsibility and they can do it, maybe it's making their own lunch, or maybe it is staying on top of their own assignments that are posted online.
And is
Once
that, by the way, is that realistic? Because totally, I wanted practical. Yeah, like, can we say to our middle schooler, you should be responsible for your own, you know, plan or homework stuff?
so
Are they capable?
some are and some are not, and that's
Okay.
what makes it tricky. So the ability to have future planning, the executive functioning skill of future planning, to predict how today's work effort will impact tomorrow's work product, doesn't actually kick in until age 15. So parents often erroneously think their child in middle school is lazy. They're not lazy, they just do not have that skill set yet. Now, some have more challenges than others. If they have ADHD, if they really struggle with executive functioning, and those kids will need more scaffolding. You have to meet them where they are. The goal, though, is to keep moving the dial. So once they show you they can do something, you don't ever do it for them again. If they can email that teacher on their own, so maybe the first time you write the teacher and they sit next to you and watch you do it, and then the second time they do it and you watch to make sure it's respectful and gets the point across. And then the third time they do it on their own, if they can execute on their own, you don't ever write that email again. So that's really the framework for moving the dial on giving them more independence. And you don't want to approach them with judgment because, like I said, a lot of these skills are not things that they have acquired yet. Keeping a planner is a really hard task. And some kids really need to have extra support. What I will say though is that you don't want it to cause friction at home.
Mm.
And if you're fighting over that planner, if you're fighting over that homework, I would punt it back to this school and have the teacher or an advisor check that planner at the end of the class or at the end of the day, so that you can at home be this peaceful place, which is particularly important right now.
Mm. That's, oh man, again, such gold. I love the demonstration of they watch you write the email, then you write it together, then you watch them do it, right? That, I
I
mean,
do,
that
we do, you
system,
do.
yes, that can be applied to lots and lots of things. And let's all write this on our bathroom mirrors. Once a middle schooler shows you they can do something, don't ever do it for them again.
And
That's powerful.
and you asked about confidence. That's how you build their confidence.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. If you take something back,
Yes,
it tells them they can't
exactly.
or that they did it wrong. And that's the last thing we want to do as parents. Okay. Beautiful, beautiful. So good. And I think, there's some parent wars about this. And I asked you this question for a really specific reason, because I know people in my audience have come to me and said, Katie, my husband doesn't think my kids should be making their own lunches. He thinks I'm lazy because I'm, shuffling off my work on them. And I've actually had, on social media, people comment to me like, why are your kids cooking dinner? That you're so mean. They should just be kids and have fun. And so it's really important to hear from you. You're on the ground, you're in the middle of a ton of middle schoolers. They need that,
They
right? This is not us being lazy.
No, and middle schoolers in particular, it's a developmental imperative to feel a sense of agency and competency. So if they're making their own lunch, they are feeling pretty good about themselves, that they can make an impact on how good they feel about what they eat that day. And they can anticipate that lunch because they made it, they know exactly what's in it. So it's not a punishment or something negative to have a child do a task of that sort.
Ugh, you've used the word agency. And so now you're my favorite person in the world, because it's just one of my favorite words. And people don't always use it the same way educators do, right? Agency, the ability to do something for yourself, to be in control and to make some choices in your life. That's really that's what toddlers want. That's why they throw fits. It's what middle schoolers want. That's why they slam the door on us, right?
Yes. And risk taking is transferable. If a kid can make an omelet, then they're going, or learns how to make an omelet, and that's something that's hard for them, they're actually going to be more likely to try it for the basketball team. It doesn't really make intuitive sense, but it is transferable. That ability to try something new in one area will allow them to try something new in another area.
Wow, I'm going to repeat that one too. Risk taking is transferable. And not a risk, it's not like a dangerous thing, but
No,
sometimes just trying something new.
it's a risk to a middle schooler to try something that might leave them feeling incompetent.
Oh, got it.
Yes, I'm actually thinking about something my own 13-year-old son, he just turned 13, did not too long ago. He decided he wanted to make caramel.
Ooh.
And he asked me if we had the brown sugar and the butter. And I was upstairs. It was on a day that I was doing virtual counseling, and he was really wanted that caramel. And so he was going to figure out a way to do it. And about an hour later, I smelled something really acrid. And I thought,
it's really hard to do.
what am I smelling? And then suddenly I saw smoke coming up through this stairwell. And then a few more minutes went by and the fire alarm went off. And I got off the computer and I thought to myself, what on earth is going on? And what had happened, and I don't cook the way you do, but what had happened is that in his zest to make the caramel, he had burned it into a crisp on the bottom of the pan. And to compensate for that, he tried to throw it out and start over. But when he threw the hot caramel into the trash can, which was plastic, it burned a hole in the bottom.
Oh, no.
And while he was trying to figure out how to fix the caramel, he left the stove on with the pan, which then melted the plastic handle.
Oh my goodness, this is just a series of disasters. Your poor son.
Yes. And so he was a little freaked out by the whole thing. And I said to him, I'm glad you decided to try this on your own. I said, I'm just wondering, and I'm putting on that, like, I've got to have patience right now hat, no, I know too much sometimes. I wanted him to cook on his own. I wanted him to be able to try something, and I didn't want him to not do it again because I was too angry and he didn't want drama. So,
Yeah.
so I'm just curious. And with middle schoolers, it's always helpful to start with phrases like I wonder or I'm curious, which are not as judgmental. I wonder if there's anything different you would do next time. And he looked at me, and I think he was waiting to see if I'd get angry. And he goes, I think I'd follow the recipe.
Oh man. Okay. Also gold. I'm just curious, or I wonder. I'm seriously, this might be the first interview I ever listen to again the very next day after we record it because I'm in, 12 and 15-year-old. So let's talk about, I mean, I would follow the recipe. That to most people would make perfect common sense. That should have been the first step. Although there are many adults who do not follow the recipe. It's a skill. But there's a certain common sense, critical thinking that middle schoolers need to build.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to making like social decisions, right? There's a lot of following the crowd going on. So I would love to hear your tips for building that common sense, building that independent kind of thinking that I can be myself and not just follow.
It's really hard for middle schoolers to be themselves because they don't like themselves very much.
Oh,
And they're constantly trying to impress their friends. And one of the conversations I have to have a lot with middle schoolers to get them to calm down a little bit because it's hurting them socially. They're trying so hard to make somebody that they want to be friends with laugh, or they end up getting it wrong and maybe offending somebody or being annoying. Really helping them feel good about themselves actually helps them socially because they don't try as hard, which is often what trips them up. So that social piece, it's the same scaffolding in a lot of ways as the academics. When we were talking about the recipe, I was thinking about the kindergartners in my school. I'm in a K through 8. And one of the things you'll see with a kindergartner is that they'll get in trouble because when they're packing up to leave, they'll put on their backpack and then they'll try to put on their jacket, and they have the order backwards, and it
yeah.
doesn't work. And the equivalent of that later on in middle school is, they have that permission form in their bag that they remember to get signed by their parent, but then they forget to either put it in their backpack or take it out and give it to their parent. And that carries over even to the social piece. They have a very poor ability to anticipate how the way they behave, the friends they choose will actually impact their happiness, their sense of self, all of those things. And one of the most excruciating things for parents is that we can tell in about 2 minutes if our kid is making a poor friend choice. And if they were in elementary school, we just wouldn't make play dates with that kid. We would be a little more directive. With middle school, if you try to tell them who they can or can't be friends with, they're going to bend over backwards to prove to you why you're wrong, or they're going to sneak around. And so again, asking those questions in a tone of non-judgment, not being critical. I wonder, I'd really love to understand, like, you seem to spend a lot of time with that particular friend. What is it that you like about them? You can say, I've noticed you're not yourself when you're with that friend. Uh, I like to remind kids that you are who you're with. And if you are with somebody who is not behaving in a way that you want to be reflected back on you, you might want to think about what that means. If you're with the kids who are flinging hamburgers in the cafeteria, it's probably not going to end so well for you either.
I feel like there's a lot of foundation work that can be done for middle school in elementary school in this area, right? Like to help kids see even in elementary school, like how certain friends make them feel or what the kind of trouble certain friends get them into. Is that a conversation that's developmentally appropriate for an elementary
Yes,
kid?
and there's actually something you can use with both elementary and middle schoolers called inoculation theory. And this is
Okay.
research from a guy named Josh Compton at Dartmouth College. And he has found that you can inoculate your child against poor choices, poor decision making, the same way a vaccine inoculates you against the flu. And here's how it works. You preview a scenario like you're going to hear gossip, and it's going to be really juicy and maybe not that kind. But even though it's not that kind, you might want to share it because it's fun to have the best story at the lunch table. It's fun to be the center of attention. And then once you preview the scenario and why they might be tempted to do it, You then want to give them a counter example of why they don't want to do it. And so you would follow up with, but you know what feels even better? Feels even better to be known as a vault, the person you can trust with any secret, the first person you would go to in a crisis. And so, whenever you're in a situation as a parent where you can walk your kid through a scenario like that, especially if you have an organic way to do it, you will inoculate them against future temptation. That's true for cheating, vaping in a bathroom, it can be anything. And the cool thing about inoculation theory is that you don't have to cover every last scenario, drinking at a
Mm.
party. You just have to cover enough that you get them in the habit of thinking it through in the same way that you've thought it through for them. You're kind of the prefrontal cortex for your kid for a while, and that helps.
Wow. And so that's not role playing. They're not really involved. You're just sort of talking it through and allowing them to process that.
Yes, I mean, if there's a scene in a movie, or if there's a lyric in a song,
Mm.
or if you're reading a story, and you can do it in a way that's a little bit more natural, that's great.
Okay.
Kids in middle school really overinflate social risk, and I'll give you an example. So we had a situation where a student used the word gay as an insult, and I noticed that nobody said anything, which surprised me because it was a group of kids who are pretty quick to call people out
Mm.
for things. But in this particular situation, they didn't. And they knew there was someone in the room who probably would have been hurt by the way the
Right.
word was used. And so I asked a group of kids, I'm wondering, did you notice, first of all, that nobody said anything? Yes. I'm wondering why. No judgment. I'm sure you had a reason, but I'm wondering why nobody said anything. And one of them said, well, I was worried that they would think I was gay, which of course we don't, that in and of itself is a problem that we need to address. That was them being honest. Another kid said, I was worried that I would suddenly be the center of attention and maybe I would be targeted for something.
Oh, for
Both,
sure.
both valid reasons not to want to insert themselves in the situation. But then what I did is I asked the group as a whole, if someone else had done that, what would you think about them? And they said things like, I would think they were strong enough to do the right thing. I would think they were a good person. I would think they were brave. And it was a way of using a real life situation to illustrate for them, to really prove to them that the risk they thought they were assuming really didn't match the reality. They actually would have improved their reputation if they had said something. So that's the kind of learning that happens in middle school and that we can facilitate kind of as a coach.
That is so powerful. And I love you just use the word coach because I was already about to say, basically, distilled down, parenting middle schoolers is wondering, being curious, and asking questions and
Yeah.
never telling them anything.
Exactly. And if you want to really nail it, you have to perfect the poker face, because kids will completely shut down in middle school if they think their parents are reactive or dramatic. That's something I always make fun of my own husband, because all of his emotions are on his face all of the time. And he knows, because I tell him, you have to hide it. You have to hide it. But if your body language and your facial expressions and the words you choose are not in alignment, your kids are going to sniff out the inauthenticity. And an example I often use is that if you tell your kids that you don't care what grade they get, as long as they study and work hard and they come home with a C, and you say to them, that's okay. It's a history test now. It's in the past. And I know you worked hard and I'm proud of you for trying. Only you wait a full minute before you say anything. All they're going to remember is that long pause.
Wow.
So everything has to be in agreement for them to really buy into what you're saying.
Oh my goodness. Well, somehow, somehow in our home, I mean, again, I've got 6, 9, 12, and 15.
Wow.
So some older kids. And so far, I'm really proud of their ability to choose good friends. So I feel like I'm gonna have to deconstruct a little bit of what we did. And I wonder if like that idea of telling your stories, telling your family's history, boy, choosing stories of friends that led us the wrong way, I would think, or gratitude for our own friends as adults. That's got to be helpful too.
Yes. And also, talking about where you stumbled. My kids know that when I was in middle school, I made poor friend choices,
Oh.
and that I often felt on the outs, like on the periphery. And one of the things that we know from research is that the kids who are on the periphery of a group that barely wants them there are actually pretty unhappy because they are constantly just trying to stay in the mix. I tell my kids that those stories. I think often parents think they're protecting kids by not sharing the hardships that they went through. And really, actually, what it does is it helps them analyze what they want and to give them a lot of praise when you see them making a good choice, as opposed to really pointing out the bad choice. Once they're finally making the decision to pull themselves out of a situation that's not working for them, that you've known would never work out, and you see them shifting into a new friend group, to really say, I know that was hard. And I'm really proud of you for figuring out how to pivot, even though I know that was hard and you were disappointed. And parents can fan the flames on those positive friendships. So you can't make a play date anymore. You can't tell them who to be friends with. But if you're at a soccer practice and there's somebody on that team who you think would be a good friend match, you can take them out for ice cream together afterward. Or you can have a potluck with a family that has a kid the same age. That would be a good match. And you can have some help from the school. So parents aren't totally helpless.
Oh, such good stuff. Now, I know the pandemic, the events kind of this past year have really caused a big increase in anxiety across all age groups. We know that our kids need resilience, right? They need like the shield. So, do you have any toolbox coping tools that parents can give to their middle schoolers?
Yes, and actually, I have so many actually that it's hard to even know where to start, because that has been the focus of the last 18 months or so, just
I
trying
bet.
to give kids some tools to manage just a relentless barrage of disappointments.
Mm,
It could be just not being in the same cohort as a friend. It could be not having a, a match that they were supposed to play in. It could be not having a sleepover, a birthday party, a graduation, anything.
oh
So
yeah.
many disappointments. So this is a really good time, if you haven't been doing it already, to teach something called anticipatory decision making. And it's similar to that idea of cognitive flexibility when it comes to social disappointments, where they're playing that maybe game and coming up with alternative explanations. Only in this case, you're anticipating that something might not go your way. So I'll first give an example for much younger kids, especially for anybody who has younger kids. If you are going to the ice cream store, you could ask your child, what flavor are you going to get? And let's say they say they're going to get peppermint stick. You might say to them, okay, well, what if they don't have peppermint stick? What is your second choice? And let's say they say chocolate, and say, okay, well, what's something good about them not having your first choice? What's something good about actually having chocolate instead? And then say, and if they don't have chocolate and peppermint stick, what's your second backup choice? And let's say they say, well, I'll do Rocky Road. Oh, I haven't had Rocky Road in a while. Tell me what's good about getting the Rocky Road. And the way that translates later on is, if you know your child is putting themselves out there, let's say they're applying a private school or a magnet program out of eighth grade, or let's say that they are running for student council, or they're trying to, you know, volunteer for an organization that doesn't typically hire kids their age. It could be anything where you know that the odds of success are such that they're likely to encounter disappointment, or even might encounter disappointment.
Sure.
And you can do the same exercise. Oh, okay, I see that you want to be a part of this magnet program at this school. What do you think you might want to do if that doesn't work out? And how about if that one doesn't work out? And what are some good things about those other options? And then this is the key part: when you see your child practicing flexible thinking in the face of that disappointment, when it doesn't work out, when you see them picking themselves back up, to really heap the praise on them
Mm,
and let them know that you're really proud of them, and that you see that they're disappointed, and that you really appreciate that. That doesn't mean you don't let them grieve what didn't work out for them. I've had 2 years in a row of kids applying to college, so I did a lot of anticipatory problem solving with them in those 2 years. This is not something that stops at the end of middle school. It's something that we as adults can model, and that we need to remind ourselves to do too, because it's hard to see our kids be disappointed. I, I highly recommend thinking about the positives of some of the negatives within this pandemic, because that helps us stay even. And when we stay even, our kids are going to be more likely to stay even, because emotions are contagious. They spread through a social network, and they're going to do better if we're doing better.
this is just incredible. I feel like many parents, intentional parents like those in our audience, are pretty good at playing cleanup. We're pretty good at calming the kids down and figuring out the right language when the ice cream shop doesn't have peppermint or chocolate and they have to have Rocky Road, right? But this is a little bit mind-blowing to think, to be such forward thinking, this anticipatory, predictive conversations. And I can totally see how it's solving the problem. We don't have to play cleanup quite as often. Cleanup is stressful, but anticipatory is not. Yeah.
Yeah, you're teaching them to self-regulate in the face of disappointment, which is a really important life skill.
This is so good. Well, Phyllis, this has been amazing. I always love to leave parents with a message of hope, something like, and you've given so many good tips, but if you can encourage parents in one way about helping, guide our middle schoolers through this tumultuous time, what would you say?
I would say that all of the bumps and bruises along the way, as painful as they are, really present parents with this golden opportunity. And I consider middle school the last best chance to imprint values and good habits and positive behavioral expectations, and to really cement your relationship with your child. And I'll share this story to close about a teenage girl who's friends with my daughter. And when she was 16, she shared a story with me from her middle school years. She was at a dance, and there were some girls across the room who were making fun of another girl in the room, saying her dress looked like curtains or a rug. And it was really triggering for her because she had just started at a new school herself, in part because she had been bullied at her old school. And she went home and she was so upset. She went straight to her room. She didn't even take off her dress or her shoes or her makeup. And her parents knew something was wrong and tried to talk to her, but she wouldn't. And about an hour later, she came out of her room. She went into their bedroom where they were already in bed. This was pretty late at this point. She got in bed between them and started to cry. This was in sixth or seventh grade. And she was sobbing, and her mother, instead of saying, "This seems kind of crazy to get this upset over something so minor," she shared a story about how she felt vulnerable in middle school, and she told her daughter she understood, and she just let her cry, and she never minimized the situation. And this is the daughter telling me this story, not the mother. Wow. And then a few years later, this particular child hit a really rough patch in her teen years. She was suicidal. And most kids have a really hard time asking for help. But she told me she went straight to her mother. And I said, "I love that. Tell me what made it comfortable for you to go to your mother." And that's when she shared that story. And she said, "I knew my parents could handle it because I knew they could handle the big stuff because I did so well with the little stuff." So this is a phase where you want to do well with the little stuff because it will pay dividends later when they hit the bigger stuff.
That's an incredible
story. Is the big stuff.
The little stuff is the big stuff in middle school.
Yes.
And we have to guide and ask questions. Boy, I have been schooled. I don't know how I got my first child through middle school without knowing you.
We all make it through okay.
But we do. We all make it through. Some feel better about it than others. Well, I mean, this has just been absolutely fabulous. Parents with middle schoolers or soon to be middle schoolers, even the 6-year-olds will someday be middle schoolers. So absolutely fantastic. Phyllis Fagell, you got to go get her book too. Middle School Matters. And there's probably so many more tools in there. Thank you so very much. This has been an excellent interview.
Thank you for having me on.
Everyone, kids cook real food. I'll be back next week with another episode of the Healthy Parenting Connector, helping to connect you who really want to raise those healthy, independent adults with experts like Phyllis who have the information you need.